Thanks to Chomps for sponsoring this video.
So all of the lower cabinets are done in the kitchen and they look awesome. I'm thrilled with how they came out. In fact, they're way better than I could have possibly imagined. But now we're moving on to the uppers, and that's the last set of cabinets to be built. If you'll remember, I built all the lower carcasses at once early on, but I didn't do that for the uppers because I didn't have the designs finished yet. I have them finished now, and I'm gonna start from square one again, building the carcasses. I'm gonna show you how I build basic upper carcasses with a method that helps level them out perfectly every time, as well as a super sleek surround for a range hood. Now, I made a couple mistakes in this build, and I'm gonna show you exactly how I fixed them, as well as talk more about the design of these cabinets. But for now, let's get to breaking down some sheets of plywood.
All the cabinet interiors on this project are built with pre-finished maple plywood. This is kind of an industry standard for making a wood finish interior cabinet. The nice thing about it is since it's pre-finished, it saves a ton of time. Also, the coating is really strong compared to anything that I can manufacture in the shop. All the vertical sides of these cabinets are exactly the same, and the nice thing about that is I can just batch them out. Unfortunately, the Capex was about 1/4 inch too short to cut through all these, so I had to finish them off with a pull saw. All the panels need to now be edge banded, so I ripped a bunch of white oak on the table saw, 1/4 inch thick. I have done so many of these panels now that I have this edge banding down to a total science. Wood glue, nails, bandy clamps, repeat.
Okay, let's take a second to talk about design so you can see what the heck I'm building. So as you can see, there are tons of different iterations. This is a program called SketchUp, and it's what I principally use for design. And it allows me to iterate a whole bunch of different options. And as you can see, there's some design things that just aren't working, like this valance here and these little cubbies here. But some of what I'm aiming for is starting to come through. Ashley and I toyed with the idea of glass doors at one point. I thought they would be really fun to build, but ultimately I don't think it achieves the look that we want for this kitchen. So here's where we actually ended up in the end, is over here, which I think is probably one of the simplest designs so far, but you can see it addresses a lot of the issues. The hardest thing with this kitchen is that there's, the focal point is the window, right? But the window is behind a wall for most of the time, so I sort of wanted to shift the focal point or have a second focal point above the oven, which is this section right here with really cool handles and some of the louver details there. So the cabinets that I'm working on right now is one independent cabinet for the left side, one independent cabinet for the center, and then 2 cabinets that are going to flank either side. Ultimately pretty simple, but it did take a while to get here. So let's get back into the shop and finish building them.
With the edge banding dry, it's now time to trim off the excess. I start by trimming the long ends with a pull saw. And then I bring it over to the router table. I've got a flush trim bit set up there with a feather board, and this trims off that little tiny lip that gets left behind. I like to make them just a little bit wider than the plywood, so afterwards you can flush them up perfectly. Now all the panels get a rabbet on the inside of them, and this is going to receive the back panel. I like to inset that rabbet, especially because I'm going to be using cleats on this, and also it's going to give me room for wiring, which we're going to cover in a later video. I'm going to hold all these cabinets together with screws. So I decided to use a marking gauge to mark out the screw locations. This might be a little obsessive, but I kind of like to keep things consistent on my cabinets just so that I know where all the screws are placed. I countersunk those holes that I marked out, and then I can assemble the cabinet. I start with the base, and then using my vise, I can lock them into place with a couple of dogs. Make sure that I have room for the screws to go in. I slide in a scrap back panel, and then I can pre-drill and screw them in. The reason why I went with screws is that it's easy to assemble and disassemble. It's also really fast, and I think plenty strong. You're never going to see the outside of these cabinets, so I'm not too worried about the appearance of them. Before I can attach the top, I need to cut the backs to fit, and I'm using a piece of 1/4-inch pre-finished maple to match the interiors of the cabinets. With the first one assembled, I can set that aside, and then it's a rinse and repeat for the next two. I got 3 of the 4 assembled, and then I need a critical component to assemble the 4th one. Fortunately, it arrived right on time.
So I've assembled all but one of the carcasses. The 4th one is the one that goes over the top of the hood, and it's going to include this vent. The vent is super streamlined. I'm really excited that I found this model. It has just a chrome strip across the front, and that, let's see if I can do this without breaking it, opens like this when it's in place, but when it's closed, it's exactly the same depth as the cabinets. In order to get it to line up properly though, I wanted to make sure and actually fit it to the cabinet and hang it on the wall. This is actually the first thing that's going to go into place before any of the other cabinetry so that I can get everything lined up perfectly to it. So I'm going to spend a little time, get familiar with the instruction manual, figure out what all I can do with this, and then start building that middle cabinet.
There are really only 2 things that I'm interested in this instruction manual: the measurements and how to flip the vent around. It comes assembled in the upright position, which I think is more common, but instead I want the most direct flow outside, and I don't want any extra ducting inside of the cabinet. So I am going to flip it around. Now I need to cut out the bottom panel, and I inset that 3/4 of an inch on either side. Should end up with 30 inches wide total when the cabinet's built. And then I marked out which corners I needed to cut. Then took it over to my bandsaw using the bandsaw fence and trimmed the 2 sides almost all the way through. Then to make the long cut, I raised the blade up into the panel using my table saw. Now this is a more advanced technique, I would say. Just do this at your own comfort level. You could probably make all the cuts of the bandsaw if you really needed to. Back over at the workbench, I finished trimming it out using a Japanese pull saw. Now this front edge is super spindly, but once I put edge banding on it and it's actually connected to the hood and the rest of the cabinet, I think it will be fine. And speaking of which, the next step was to glue on the edge banding and hold it in place while it dried using handy dandy Rockler bandy clamps. After everything was dry, I trimmed off the excess and then can slot it into the cabinet. I was a little worried about breaking that front piece, so before I clamped it together, I added in a spacer at the back, and then I could screw it all together. The cabinet was flush on both sides and in the right spot in the front, so I could move forward with constructing this cabinet. I decided to put this middle kind of shelf in because I want to block off the metal hood. So I put a spacer in, and then I could screw it in from the outside. In order to assemble it, I had to put the top on, but then I didn't know the spacing for the back panel. So I decided to assemble the whole thing, and then I can remove the top, again, why it's so nice to have screws, and slide in the back panel, cut to the right size, and then I can put the top back on. I mentioned at the beginning of the video that I'm going to hang these cabinets with a system that'll make sure that it's perfectly level all the way across. And I'm sure some of you saw this coming, but I'm using a French cleat system. This is a 1/2-inch piece of Baltic birch plywood that I cut on a 45-degree angle, and the two 45s will meet up on the wall. In order to attach them to the cabinet, I'm using pocket hole screws. It's good to have a nice tight fit, and I also like to put screws on either end. That just helps both square up the cabinet and make them a little bit stronger. One thing that I realized that I forgot to do is that I need to make a couple relief notches on the sides so that I can connect the French cleat across all three of the cabinets. So I removed the first one that I installed, and then using my oscillating tool, I could cut out a notch. I then put the French cleat back in, screwed it back in, and I could rinse and repeat for the remaining cabinets. So only cut out notches on the insides of these cabinets where they're facing each other, and you can see how this works now when they're all lined up. This is just a scrap piece of cleat, but when I have the full length cleat, you can see it'll run from end to end uninterrupted.
So Chomps is back as the sponsor of this week's episode. Last time we talked about how they are the perfect shop snack, and I've been keeping them stashed right here, and they've been a lifesaver during the kitchen build. When I'm deep in the zone, and I'm sure plenty of you can relate to this, I totally forget to eat. But these keep me going. Each stick has 10 to 12 grams of protein, no sugar, grass-fed beef, and they are seriously tasty. So I bring them everywhere, traveling, camping, you name it. They're awesome. Chomps come in flavors like original beef, jalapeno, sea salt, and original turkey. Last time they sponsored a video, they asked for flavor ideas from you guys, and you did not disappoint. My favorite suggestion came from William Moore 4101, who had a bunch of awesome ideas, including steak with peppercorn cognac cream sauce chomps, herb butter steak chomps, burnt in barbecue chomps, and chicharrones chomps. So thanks, William. Now I'm starving. And until those flavors show up on the shelves, this time the nice folks at Chomps want to know if you are team jalapeno or team original. So let me know in the comments. Personally, I am team jalapeno. I think it's just got the right level of spice for me. If you want to try some Chomps for yourself, click the link in the description box to learn more. Thanks, Chomps. Now let's get back to the build. So I may have made a pretty big mistake. Like a design error, basically. I've been designing this in the 3D software, and I really liked the idea of that nice clean edge across the bottom of it. But I posted on Instagram about how cool the range hood is with that little thing that pulls out, and somebody commented, "Isn't that going to be in your face the whole time when you're cooking?" And I was like, oh no. So I don't know that it's gonna be. I don't know that it's gonna be annoying. We have the stove installed in the house, so I'm just gonna bring these in. I'm gonna hang them up on the cleat, take a look at them, see if there's any issues, and if there are issues, I'm at a phase now where I can make those corrections. I don't really want to, but I might have to. So let's go hang the cleat in the house and see how these look.
Using my laser level, I can make sure that not only the cleat on the right is level, but also the cleat on the left. I found the studs in the wall and connected it using some structural screws. I then slot the middle cabinet on, make sure it's centered, and then can do the outer cabinets as well. And without really thinking about it, I put the range hood in too, which turns out has spring-loaded clips, so it can be held into place, but there's no way I could remove it on my own. I tried, but I was genuinely scared that I was going to drop it.
Nope. Can I get a hand? I made a critical error. Just meeting the kitchen in the new house. Kitchen, new house, got it. Bye. So, I set this into place, but I can't remove it without it crashing down on here. But before we do that, what do you feel about this height? It's actually going to stick out about 3/4 of an inch more, and it'll come out to here when you're cooking. Does that feel okay?
I think so. For me, I'm short. Be like, well, is that like if you got like a big pot?
Yeah.
It might be a little low.
I can raise it up to 24 inches. Let's get it out of here and then we can.
Okay.
Thanks to Ashley, I was able to remove it, but I do think we have a problem. Right, I'm really glad that we did that because I do think that this is too low. When Ashley and I were like thinking about like lifting a pot up and pulling it off of a burner, it just seemed really close to it. So I'm gonna move it up. Fortunately, all these cabinet parts are all screwed together, so I just have to take the center one out, disassemble it, remake it a little bit, and then put it all back together. With the decision made, I removed the cabinets and went back to my office, redesigned it in SketchUp, and then could start disassembling that center cabinet. I cut the top off of the sides, and that just made the most sense because it meant the fewest number of screw holes. That middle shelf will still line up with its original screw holes. I cut the back down to a smaller size, and then I also have to recut the notches for the cleat. But other than that, it was pretty quick to put it back together. This one's back together, but I still have to take these two apart, mostly because, well, they're a different type of wood. So I need these to be white oak. I also need to cover up my screw holes. So that's going to involve probably using a dado stack to cut out all this material. And then I'll probably countersink these screws a little deeper and put a veneer over the top of it. I don't want to use like just regular like paperback veneer because there's going to be heat coming up here and that might peel just from the heat. So I need to actually glue this in. So it's going to be a bit of a process, but we can do it. I resawed some strips on the bandsaw and then took them over to the drum sander to get them to thickness. These are thick enough to glue together, and the technique that I like to do that with is just adding blue tape to one side and then flipping the boards over. You can set it on the edge of the table and fill that gap with wood glue, press it back together, and then tape it up and let it dry. It's always a good idea to clamp them between two flat surfaces, and for that I used my workbench and a piece of pre-fin. Back over the table saw, I can cut them to height using my cross-cut sled. I made the panel long enough so I can get two pieces out of it, so I'll have that grain match on both sides. I detach the two sides that need the veneers, and then I can cut off the front edge banding. It's not gonna look right if I cut into it and add the veneer in, so I figured I would just start over. It's easy to add it back in afterwards. I marked out where I needed to cut and then set up the dado stack on my table saw along with a miter sled and the fence. This was probably the trickiest cut of the entire thing. It was hard to keep the plywood flat as I was cutting, and it's super slippery, so it kind of wanted to move while I was cutting it, but I did manage to get through it. Also, this little bench dog rabbiting plane was super helpful to clean up the cut. So kind of annoyingly, I can't glue those panels on before I screw the plywood into place because the screws are actually going to be underneath this section. But it's okay, I don't think I'm going to have to disassemble this again, hopefully not. So I assembled the cabinet again and then glued the panels into place. With the panels nice and flat, I then glued on that bit of edge banding I cut off at the very beginning. And now we're ready to move on with the project. I need to add some shelf pin holes for the shelves we're going to install, and Rockler sent me out this Pro Shelf Pin drilling jig, which I have their previous model, which is a little lighter weight, but this one has a lot more versatility, so I'm excited to try it out. I like that this one has rails that you can slide in and out, and you have two sets of holes. A lot of times you have to drill one side and then flip the jig around and drill the other side, which always leads to misalignment. And if you've ever misaligned shelf pin holes, it is a nightmare. It's really hard to fix, and all of your shelves will be wobbly when you slide them in. So I think this tool is a bit of a game changer. Once I drilled out one side with all the shelf pin holes that I wanted, I flipped it over to the other side, and then I have these little boards that I've been locking into place. They're cut to the exact same size, so they center up this jig really well and allow me to run through all the cabinets super quickly. And since I have all the cabinets on their sides already, I decided to drill out for the hinge plates. Now, we're not gonna get to the cabinet doors in this video. That will be in a future video, but this will set them up so it's super easy to just clip them into place later on. So now that I have the hinge plates installed, I realize that I have a bit of a problem. My plan was to cover up the vent hood with a panel, and that works great until the hinges have gone in, and now the hinges have to protrude this panel. So I think I'm gonna have to make some notches because, as you can see, there's not a lot of clearance. So one nice thing is that I don't have to worry about any moving parts or anything. This is static. But I do need to make a little trim cutout there. It might actually, gotta figure out how to attach this too. I don't think I want to screw it in, maybe with magnets or something. But first, let's just cut the relief for the hinges. I'm not 100% sure this is the final solution, but it is a bit of a solution. I definitely need something to cover this up. But the problem that I have is that I want to be able to adjust the hinges, and I don't think this will allow me to do that. So I'll have to remove the panel to adjust the hinges. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. I was rooting around in my bin of odds and ends, and I found these little old-fashioned cabinet door magnets. And when I saw them, I was just like, oh, yeah, of course. This is a cabinet door that needs a latch. So, yeah, I attached the metal plates to the backside of the cabinet, and then on the inside, I screwed in the magnetic plates. And this Festool drill is so freaking handy for installing cabinet hardware. It's not even funny. I think it looks good, but I also think there's room for improvement. So let me know if you got thoughts in the comments below. So I've been putting this off, but at some point I just have to commit and put a 6.5 inch hole through this wall. So I'm glad that I waited. I'm glad that I didn't put it through before I altered the cabinet. But I also discovered that since I altered the cabinet, my placement for the outlet was just a little bit off. I cut away the drywall around it and was able to pry it off the 2x4 that was locking it into place. And then I screwed it back in and patched the drywall hole. Once the patch was in, I could then reinstall the cabinet and finally drill that big hole. My biggest concern about drilling this hole wasn't on the inside, but the outside. I was so worried that it was going to end up in a weird spot on a shingle and dividing between multiple shingles. But fortunately, it was basically as perfect a spot as I could have imagined. It took a little time to get through all the layers of siding, but once I did, I had a nice clean hole and easy access for the vent. And speaking of the vent, it's now time to install it permanently into the cabinet and then hang the cabinet on the wall. I lowered the cabinet body over the top of it, and then I had to figure out a way to secure it. I tipped it back a little bit and added some clamps on the front. That held it well enough to tip it all the way over on its back, and then I could put some spacers underneath to hold it at a more precise level. There are 4 screw holes that connect the vent hood to the cabinet, and they're all behind this glass panel. So I lifted that up, put in a piece of plywood. That gave me access, and then I could just screw them all in. The last thing to do is to attach the vent hose out the back, and then we're ready to hang it on the wall. Thanks to my buddy Brian for coming over to help me hang it.
Screwed in 4 places.
Hi, Ashley.
All right. So grab that.
And thanks to Ashley too.
Okay, this is where it's gonna get. Excellent.
All right.
Seemed like it went mostly on her side. Didn't seem-
There we go.
That felt like it clicked.
Yeah.
We gotta
Did that go through, Ashley?
Yeah.
Nice.
With the vent hood up, the rest of them were pretty easy to install. I hung them on the cleats and then screwed them together.
All right, this is working great. This is it at its quietest mode, which is pretty quiet. That's full bore, and that's a lot of suction. And then the whole thing turns off when you close it, turns back on, and you can turn it off so it's just the light. I'm thrilled with how this looks, and for those of you who have stuck around to the end of the video, there's a little bit of a teaser of the next video in here. There's a lot left to do. I gotta cover the end panels and build the cabinet doors, but I also added these valances in here. Check those out. So dimmable LEDs, I'm gonna cover this in detail in the next video. Also, there was a Easter egg in this video, if you caught it, the new t-shirt designs for the house. I've been working on this with my Patreon supporters, trying to design a commemorative t-shirt for this project. It'll be a limited edition run. It'll come out in September. And so if you could find it in the video, go check it out. But I will fully announce it really soon, and I'm so excited about it. So thanks so much for watching. Thank you to Chomps for sponsoring this video. Thank you, as always, to my Patreon supporters. You guys are the best, and I'll catch you on the next one.